This is Tiki with Tiki Fullerton.
Hello there, I'm Tiki Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up, a special place in hell for the Canadian PM and a special bond for dictator Kim Jong-un. We'll take apart the extraordinary 10 days of Trump's wheeling and dealing with White House watcher Professor Ed Blakely. Now, this week, the world watching with a mixture of shock and awe feelings the extraordinary meeting between US Commander-in-Chief Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Remember, the world was only just recovering from the G7 meeting, and Mr. Trump's quip that there was a special place in hell for Canada's Prime Minister Trudeau. He has a special bond for Kim Jong-un, though. I caught up with White House watcher Professor Ed Blakely for his take on what these developments mean for the US, North Korea and the Chinese.
The Trump Foundation, which is meant to do things for charities, education, and the like, he's been using as his personal bank account, according to the charges.
Yeah.
The allegations are he used some of the money to buy things for his home in Key Largo. He used some of the money for his own campaign. And other money went for other things that were not foundation related, including things that bills he need to pay. And let's not go on to some of those bills, because that is another matter.
Well, okay. Well, would that have included campaign money?
That would include campaign money, but there are some ladies out there who may have gotten some of that money.
Oh, right.
So,
well, I mean, obviously, all allegations at this stage. The president has called the Attorney General sleazy, but the Attorney General is looking for what, 2.8 million, as I understand it,
yes,
restitution, plus a 10-year ban for Mr. Trump serving as a director of a not-for-profit.
That's right.
I mean, do you think if these allegations prove to be true, I mean, taking a step back, do you think Donald Trump, how do you think he views a fund like that?
Well, it is a fund. It's just more money. Everything's fungible with him. I don't think this is a big issue for him. Being put off the boards of the foundation, not a big deal.
No.
His son's being put off, not a big deal. But it does close an avenue for building little bank accounts for your own personal use. Now, this is exactly what they accuse the Clintons of. Mm. And thus far, when they've done audits of the Clinton Foundation, they haven't found anything of this scale, at least. So perhaps the next thing he'll be doing is saying, why don't you do the Clintons?
Well, there we go. Right, well, back to the international stage, which, of course, Donald Trump has enjoyed greatly in the last 10 days. How do you see this remarkable meeting between him and Kim Jong-un?
I think it's wonderful. I think I want to call him the president, because this is a very presidential action. It's bold. No one is able to get this man to the table before. Maybe some of his rhetoric was wrong. Maybe some of the process was not quite correct. But he did it. And we can all breathe a little free air right now, knowing that there won't be some missile coming, errant missile that might hit anything. I think Kim Il-jung said, when he says he's not going to shoot any missiles, I think he means it. I think he means he's going to denuclearize. Denuclearize doesn't mean you won't have weapons.
Right.
So
what does it mean then?
It probably means that they will have some sort of a system, like some other countries do, where nuclear weapons are only used as a last resort. But let's figure out who made this deal. Certainly it wasn't Mr. Trump. This deal was made in Beijing and in Seoul. And Mr. Trump has played his part in his role.
So who benefits?
Well, who benefits most of the Chinese. The Chinese, by taking that pressure off, are able to move freely in the Pacific, freely in Asia, and with that monkey off their back, they're able to move freely down the Korean peninsula and create new relationships. When you say
the monkey off their back, you mean that the announcement that Donald Trump is actually going to potentially withdraw troops?
That's right. That's right. Those troops in Korea, over 50,000 of them, are a big deal. And the U.S. Navy is a huge deal. So removing those, and remember, the war games aren't going to be held. That means a lot of U.S. ships will be free to sail elsewhere. So for the Chinese, this is a win-win, a big win for them.
What about South Korea? What about Japan? I mean, Donald Trump in the past has wanted them to pay more for protection, and they've refused to do so.
Well, I think there'll be a lighter protection bill, and they will be stepping up for that. But the South Koreans have a different thing. This is like the East Germany reconciliation, and I was there more than a decade ago and went through their reconciliation plans. They have a plan to bring the North Koreans in, including language education, including exchanges of scientists and the like. So they have a plan. I think some of the elements of that plan will go into force very, very soon in the area of agriculture.
In the area of agriculture?
Yes, yes. The South Koreans are pretty good at growing rice.
Yes.
They're pretty good at growing other crops. They're pretty good at growing crops that are non-seasonal, using various kinds of techniques and technology.
But we hear these horror stories about North Korea and famine.
Famine, and that's real. So I think if people get a little bit of food in them, then Kim Jong will be a little safer in his seat, but for how long? Once people have food, a little bit of shelter, they start looking around for what other freedoms can I have. So he's playing a tough game here at home, but he's got the Chinese behind him, and I suspect there's really no other game for him at this point, because the end game was just too much of a disaster.
Now, the bull in the china shop up at the G7, that was quite a performance. How, now that the dust has settled a little bit, how do you see trade relationships, particularly with Europe?
I think they're pretty dicey right now, and with Canada in particular.
Yes.
Where Trump gets his figures from, I went through every book I could find, and I couldn't find this great deficit and imbalance of trade between Canada and the United States. He took out all the services, the big banks and things like that do business in Canada. They don't have those banks. Bank of America, all Citicorp, all these people are doing business in Canada.
Yes, he said, somebody's told me that, he said.
Yes, somebody's told me that, please. Pig farmers or whatever. Guess what? They grow pigs in Canada too. So I think here the rhetoric was just a bit too extreme. He's really put people offside, Merkel and people like this. The issue for Europe, though, is they haven't got their act together. The Brits are pretty much off the table in the European Union. The Italians, very dicey. The Greeks, very dicey.
But when President Trump mentions Vladimir Putin and perhaps they could bring him back and make up the G8, that would have been quite jarring for the European leaders to hear. I think.
That was just a slap in their faces, particularly after all he's done and the poisoning of the Asian in Britain. So let's understand that there is some real financial and other undercurrent here. This is not a love for Putin. There's something going on where Donald Trump has some debt to pay, real debt to pay.
That's what you think,
in Russia.
And you you think Mr. Mueller will uncover this?
I think he's already uncovering it. I think it's very close. He is following the money. How did Trump have money after the rest of the world had none? When the world collapsed in the late 80s, in the early 90s, Trump had cash. Where did it come from?
After the break.